Hi, my name is Samaya Berkeley, and this is my presentation for the Mental Health and Media assignment. The article I chose is entitled Lawsuit Alleges Inmates with Mental Illnesses Being Kept in Solitary Conditions from the Times Union publication published about a week ago. The article covers a lawsuit against the New York State prison system regarding how inmates with mental illnesses are being treated at Marcy Correctional Facility. Let me pose a question to y'all. What happens when people with mental illnesses are subjected to solitary confinement? This lawsuit gives us an alarming answer, or maybe an obvious one for some of us. They suffer even more severely. In this presentation, I'll summarize the article, provide a critical analysis connected to our course, and explain what it means for our professional practice as social workers. So first, let me introduce the topic. The article focuses on the intersection of incarceration and mental health, highlighting how legal protections meant to safeguard people with mental illnesses are not always upheld in practice. It sets the stage for understanding the broader implications of systematic neglect within the prison system, correctional facilities, and our overall justice system. 9 inmates with let's really emphasize diagnosed mental health conditions are suing prison officials. They claim they are being held in near solitary conditions, locked in their cells for almost 24 hours a day, with little to no therapy or out of cell time. The lawsuit argues that this violates both federal and state laws, including the Humane Alternatives to Long-Term Solitary Confinement Act, or better known as HALT. The plaintiff described the conditions as horrific, with services cut back, programming stopped, and cells kept extremely unsanitary. Officials have defended the situation by citing a staffing crisis. The inmates are seeking class action status and want the courts to restore their access to mental health programming and out of cell time. On one hand, corrections officials argue that staffing shortages make it difficult to provide the required level of care. On the other hand, laws like HALT were specifically created to prevent this type of treatment. Mental health research consistently shows that solitary confinement does not help people with mental health issues. It actually leads to harm, high levels of anxiety, PTSD, self-harm, and often leads to suicide. So is a staffing crisis a valid excuse to break the law and cause further harm? The article also misses the perspective of very important groups, such as the families, medical professionals, and front of the line staff, which will give us a fuller picture. Another critical issue, which, in the state we live in, in the society that we live in, is race. Because Black people are overrepresented in U.S. prisons, they are disproportionately affected by harmful practices like solitary confinement, especially when combined with mental health issues. This demonstrates how systematic racism interacts with incarceration and disability. This connects directly to several concepts from our course. Trauma-informed care teaches us that isolating individuals with mental illnesses is not the correct way to treat mental illnesses. It only deepens their trauma. On a macro level, we see how laws like HALT and corrections policies shape practice. On a meso level, prison systems and staffing shortages influence whether care is acceptable. On a micro level, individuals suffer immediate harm from isolation and lack of therapy. We also see concepts like stigma, discrimination, and denial of human rights, core issues in our studies of mental health and mental health issues as social workers. For social work practice, there are many implications. Social workers can advocate for enforcing existing laws, provide direct support to inmates in crisis, and promote alternatives to solitary confinement. At the policy level, professionals can push for increased staffing, better oversight, and systematic reforms. Ethical issues are an extremely central part of this issue. balancing safety and security with the rights of inmates while upholding values, avoiding harm, and promoting justice. This reinforces the role of social workers as both practitioners and as advocates. So, on a personal note, I find it extremely disturbing and disgusting that despite laws like HALT, people with mental illnesses are still being subjected to near solitary conditions. Now, let's take a pause here for me to really feel my true and personal thoughts about this. I personally believe that solitary confinement is a disgusting practice for a few reasons. Number one, to isolate a person from all contact from people and being outside is cruel and unusual, and I feel like that's against the law. I feel like even if a person doesn't have a mental illness, putting them in solitary confinement can only create a mental illness or worsens a person's mental health. And then to put a person with mental health issues in solitary confinement, it's like you're asking for them to hurt themselves, harm themselves, or worsen their mental health issues. And then they ask why, when they release these people, they reoffend. It's because they were never treated for the root cause of the issue. So let me ask you a few questions about this topic. Or I like to pose a few questions for reflection. Let's rephrase it. How should prisons balance safety and security with mental health needs of inmates? What barriers or issues exist that prevent better mental health practices in care in prisons? And do you think personally that laws like HALT, referring to, let me get the definition, humane alternatives to long-term solitary confinement, do you think laws like HALT are enough, or do we need a broader systematic reform and change? So to conclude this presentation, this article highlights serious violations of laws meant to protect inmates with mental illnesses. Solitary confinement worsens mental health, disproportionately harms Black and other marginalized communities, and demonstrates the urgent need for reform. As future social workers, we must be prepared to challenge systematic injustice and work towards humane, trauma-informed solutions. Thank you for listening, and I would love to hear your feedback, questions, or any further thoughts. I'm going to add a link for petitions, groups, social justice groups, and websites that will give you more information on this topic. This is a topic I am extremely passionate about, so thank you so much for listening.